Thank you for listening to our presentation today. This presentation covers the basics of the copper sulfide mining issues. It starts with an introduction to the video, who we are, and why we're so concerned about this mining. Then we discuss background information about this mining and what is being proposed to be built. Thirdly, we talk about where the three main watersheds in northern Minnesota converge and that this is exactly where these mines are proposed. Then we describe what copper sulfide mining is and how this mining process differs so significantly from iron ore mining, leading to our pollution concerns. These are our specific concerns. As you can see, there are a lot of them, and each one on its own provides good reason to prohibit this mining in Minnesota. Here are the concerns. Guaranteed pollution, which will result from this mining. Very real potential for catastrophic dam failure. Negative economic impacts, also referred to as killing Minnesota's economic golden goose. Negative health impacts. Minnesota's health professionals strongly oppose this mining due to its harmful impacts to human health. Our treaty obligations to the Indigenous people, our bilateral non-pollution agreement with Canada. Inadequate protections for Minnesota taxpayers. The taxpayers will ultimately be liable for the reclamation and cleanup costs. And finally, the dismal track records and unscrupulousness of the corporations, Glencore and Antofagasta. We're going to go through each one of these concerns during this presentation. Then we're going to get into Minnesotan opposition to this mining and the fact that this opposition is ever increasing as more information comes out about it. We'll also discuss briefly the permitting process and public trust. And finally, we're going to go through how you can help. Hopefully, you'll come up with your own actions and next steps to help ensure that this mining never happens. In regards to who Jackie and I are, we are concerned citizen volunteers. Both of us have strong ties to the Boundary Waters and a commitment to protecting the clean waters of northern Minnesota. I, Cheryl, have recently retired as a senior scientist and the Quality GMP Regulatory Manager at the Corporate Ecolab Engineering Center. I have a residence outside of the Boundary Waters in Eagles Nest Township near Ely by the Twin Meadows Project, and I own an investment property at Giants Ridge near Polymet. I also have family members who live on the Iron Range. Regarding Jackie, she has partnered with Minnesota environmental nonprofits for the last 13 years and regularly leads trips to the Boundary Waters. She is also an advocate to stop Line 3 and to honor our treaties. She believes in living well for future generations, which she promotes through her daily living. Our goal is to lay out the basics of this issue in a clear, organized way for easy understanding. Together, Jackie and I prepared this presentation by meeting with several experts, researching published articles, and peer-reviewed studies. Many nonprofit organizations and their leaders provided the background information. A slide toward the end of this presentation specifically acknowledges and thanks them. This presentation is a compilation of their hard work and dedication to this issue. Take a look at these two pictures. This slide shows where the proposed mines would go. Both mining sites are absolutely beautiful, located at headwaters where maximum pollution damage will happen. For comparison, other copper mines in the U.S. are located in arid regions, but the proposed sites in Minnesota are located in pristine, water-rich areas, inappropriate for this type of mining. The picture on the left shows the Polymet mine site. It is in the middle of a wetlands. It is a unique, untouched peatland fen environment at the headwaters of the St. Louis River. Any pollution resulting from this mine would flow from the Partridge and Embarrass rivers into the St. Louis River and ultimately into Lake Superior. According to Judy Helgen, a PhD retired research scientist from the MPCA, if this mining occurs, the wetlands permit request openly states that 930 acres will be directly destroyed. But as importantly, the 500-acre open mining pit will be a major disruption to the wetlands, draining water from thousands more of wetland acres. This is the largest drainage of wetlands ever approved in Minnesota. and it is right in the middle of the headwaters of our main drinking water source for populations just south of Polymet, including the city of Duluth and the Fond du Lac Reservation. In addition to the open mining pit, the Polymet operation will also include a 250-foot upstream tailings dam, 240-foot waste rock pile, and a mining processing facility. Now consider that Polymet is currently proposing to expand from its current design of mining 32,000 tons a day to 118,000 tons of ore a day. The expansion plan amounts to a 3.7 times expansion. How many more wetland acres will be drained by this expanded activity? To summarize, Polymet's potential for destruction is massive and unprecedented. The picture on the right shows the site of the proposed Twin Metals mine. Twin Metals says that it intends to develop 4 ore deposits: the Maturi deposit, Spruce Road deposit, Maturi Southwest deposit, and the Birch Lake deposit. 3 of these are in heavily forested wilderness areas just outside the boundary waters, and the 4th is under Birch Lake. Birch Lake is one of the most popular recreation lakes in the Superior National Forest, outside of the boundary waters. The first one to be mined would likely be the Maturi deposit along the South Cowishi River, which flows into Birch Lake and then flows directly back through the boundary waters. Does this look to you like an appropriate place for a major industrial development? A major industrial zone just outside the boundary waters is inappropriate no matter what the design of the proposed mine and processing plant. This land is a continuum of lakes, streams, rivers, and a huge percentage of wetlands, a beautiful, unique wilderness, all interconnected. Any heavy industrial development, particularly a polluting industry like copper sulfide mining, will ruin the atmosphere of the region, destroy the ecosystem, and cause irreversible damage. There's more on this in other slides. But also, note that this immediate area contains 2 popular wilderness entry points into the BWCA, 2 popular campgrounds, and hundreds of homes and businesses. The Twin Metal mines would turn our treasured wilderness into an industrial zone with massive mines, transportation corridors, processing facilities, and tall, ugly tailings sites. The pollution, noise, traffic, etc. will reach far into the wilderness to damage what's been referred to as the crown jewel of the wilderness, our boundary waters. These are the 5 main takeaways from today's presentation. The first is that the science is overwhelming. There are astounding amounts of scientific, peer-reviewed data documenting the polluting properties of this mining. Secondly, there are no safe copper sulfide mines in a water-rich region. All fail and all pollute. Remember, these mines must be maintained in perpetuity. The rock is crushed, releasing heavy metals and other pollutants. Despite some claims to the contrary, there has yet to be a copper sulfide mine that hasn't left behind a legacy of pollution. The effects will be exacerbated by the location in Minnesota's watershed headwaters. Then there's that our drinking water in Minnesota, our wildlife, human health, and local economies are at stake here. And Minnesota's regulations for copper sulfide mines need strengthening. The relevant statute, Chapter 6132, reads more like guidelines but does not contain specific rules or standards for this mining. Our copper sulfide standards have never been applied before the Polymet North project. The reality is that Minnesota's regulations are weak for this mining. Finally, the permits and leases for this mining should be reevaluated in light of the recent dam failure, new knowledge, and need for expanded impact analyses. Also note the picture on this slide. It is from the Spruce Road test mining site in which 10,000 tons of ore were taken from a shallow strip mine in 1974. This is a picture of the polluted water 40 years after this test. The proposed production for twin metals is 50,000 tons per day, 5 times the amount from the test site, each and every day of production. If Twin Metals were to develop the 4 deposits identified to its shareholders in its 2018 report, tailings waste would be approximately 2.6 billion tons in size. The pollution, even with collection systems, water treatment, and other pollution mitigating measures, will be pervasive. As seen in the coming slides, the resulting damage will be permanent, visible, and widespread throughout the region. Moreover, the water and air pollution cannot be mitigated or fixed. The locations of these mines are in the absolute worst place for this type of mining. The map on the right shows the 3 watersheds, and the blue oval shows where this mining is proposed. The 3 watersheds are the Rainy River watershed, including the boundary waters, the St. Louis River Lake Superior watershed, and the Mississippi watershed. Again, these 3 watersheds converge right where the copper sulfide mining is proposed. At a time when clean fresh water is becoming a scarce resource, these watersheds hold some of the most pristine water in the world. These watersheds provide the sources of drinking water not only to Duluth and other northern populations, but also through the Mississippi into the Twin Cities and farther south. The map on the left shows the cleanliness of the water in these watersheds, the cleanest water in the state. Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes, and water is one of Minnesota's most precious resources. It's been said that what oil is to Saudi Arabia, water is to Minnesota. Our water is vital to us and should not be jeopardized for 20 to 30 years of mining extraction, leaving future generations to live with the consequences. So exactly what is copper sulfide ore mining? This mining is the extraction of copper and nickel from sulfide ore. The first thing to realize is that this type of mining has never been done before in Minnesota. It is chemically different from iron ore taconite mining and is inherently more hazardous due to the chemical reactive process that is used to extract the target metals, copper and nickel. Unfortunately, several heavy metals are also released as a result of this process, including most notably mercury, chromium, cobalt, lead, and arsenic. We'd like to stress that Minnesota does have a proud 135-year history of ferrous ore mining, which has been largely safe, but is also a metallic-based mining process. As with any mining, there is some level of hazard associated with iron taconite mining, but the toxicity of copper sulfide ore mining is orders of magnitude worse. The process for copper sulfide mining is completely different. It is reactive. Copper sulfide mining, the ore is crushed and chemically extracted, converting the sulfide ore to sulfuric acid. The drainage or seepage from this mining is acidic. The tailings and the rock piles from this mining become Superfund sites. The result is polluted water in perpetuity, which is destructive to ecosystems, including the forests, wetlands, habitats, wildlife, and humans. On the range, the differences between ferrous and non-ferrous mining are not well understood. There's a perception that this mining's been successfully done for many years, and the Mesabi Iron Range knows how to manage it. But the 2 types of mining get conflated. As a result, the basic differences get missed, and the cultural perceptions lead to strong views that no matter which type of mining is done, it will continue to be safe into the future. Unfortunately, the science and facts don't support this view. The differences between reactive copper ore mining and metallic iron mining, along with its consequences, need to be better understood among the public. This slide provides more general information about this mining. The Pictures of the Duluth Ore Complex, which is where the proposed mines are located. The complex extends into all three of the watersheds. With the opening of the region to exploration again as a result of the Trump policy reversals, there are 37 exploratory permits currently in process, with many more forthcoming. Oh yes, Polymet and Twin Metals are just two of the many potential mines in northern Minnesota. Once this mining gets started, there's the possibility of converting the entire Duluth complex into a giant industrial zone. Polymet has been referred to as the snowplow of the copper sulfide mines. It will lead the way for many more in northern Minnesota. What's important to note is that the Duluth complex contains an extremely low-grade ore. It contains only 0.3% copper and over 99% sulfide ore waste. These mines can only be profitable by extracting large quantities of rock to obtain low yields at very low margins. Low margins generally equate to shortcuts in safety and environmental protections. Despite knowing about the Duluth Ore Complex for over 100 years, it's never been mined until now because of its poor economic feasibility. For comparison, there's been many years of copper mining in Michigan, but the drifts of copper until recently were high grade, over 90% pure. The current one in Michigan is less pure than it once was, but is still more than 25 times more pure than the copper deposits in Minnesota. The only way for this mining to be economically viable in Minnesota is to expand the scope of its mining, leading to more pollution and destruction. In fact, the permits approved for the current design of Polymet, as written, are not viable from an economic standpoint. From the gap of financial analysis, which is explained more in slides ahead, its first conclusion, Polymet only projects returns of 9.6% based on the sized outline in its current permits. Because of the riskiness of the mining, the standard return for a profitable mine is considered to be around 30%. Moreover, this meager 9.6% return is based on a copper price at 19% higher than the past 10-year average. And the calculated returns assume no cash payments into the trust fund, which violates the permit to mine in the Minnesota sulfide standards. Hence, this is the basis of the bait and switch, also known as sham permitting. The permits are sought under one set of circumstances, and then once approved, the size is increased without necessarily completing supplemental environmental impact studies or modifying the permits. In the case of Polymet, once the permits were received, they submitted a different mine design to the Canadian authorities, increasing the approved mine size by 4 times the permitted levels. So far, the state of Minnesota is not requiring a supplemental EIS, human health impact, or comprehensive economic studies. Bait and switch, sham permitting, has been a tactic used in other regions of the world to obtain permitting. Sham permitting is specifically called out in the Clean Air Act and mustn't be allowed to happen in Minnesota. This is an area where our citizens and government leaders must demand transparency from the mining companies by requiring updated and comprehensive impact studies based on the actual size of the mine that the mining company plans to build. This slide summarizes the first of the peer-reviewed studies discussed in this presentation. This study is the Tom Myers Report, a modeling approach to siting mine facilities in northern Minnesota, USA, published in the Journal of Hydrology, December 18, 2015. This study answers the question, polluted waters from Twin Metals Maturi deposit, where will it go? The answer is, it will flow through the boundary waters and then downstream waters into Voyages National Park in Canada's Quetico Park. So what does this study predict? First of all, for surface water, the pollution will follow the flowage of water highlighted in maroon on the map. It will flow from Birch Lake to Fall Lake to Basswood Lake in Canada, and then along the Rainy River, the Canadian border, through the lakes into Voyageurs National Park and north of Canada. But there's a second mode of water pollution, through the groundwater. All of the water is interconnected through fissures, breaks in the rock, and wetlands. The pollution from this mode will be more unpredictable and widespread throughout the region. Worse, there is little calcium carbonate in this region to neutralize the acid mine seepage. There is little to no buffering capacity to mitigate the acidification of the rainy watershed waters. Mercury is already an issue, which would be intensified by the acid drainage. According to this study, not only will the harm be to the fish, but also to the forests, wildlife, and humans who eat the fish too. In regard to pollution from the Polymet mine, the water discharge permit documents the perpetual continuous discharge into the St. Louis watershed. This documentation assumes that everything is working properly without any issues. But that obviously is not how mines work in the real world. There are so many failure modes such as spills, accidental releases, pipeline discharges, natural disasters including extreme weather events, erosion, dam liquefaction, mechanical failures, and human error, to name a few. One of the biggest criticisms of the permit is that it fails to require measurement of the actual heavy metal discharges from this mining, or that the toxins from the discharges will be cumulative. The measurement frequency, locations, and specific measures are inadequate. But even more importantly, this mine is designed to pollute. According to Polymet's application to mine, as well as the environmental impact study, the proposed seepage containment system will be ineffective. This containment system is incomplete and includes the cheapest form of tailings management. Per the EIS, up to 10% of the tailings waste seepage will escape the containment system entirely and directly discharge into the environment. This 10% seepage will not be monitored and was not included in the engineering models of how much toxins will be released. And per Polymet's own application to mine, the maintenance system is designed to release the toxins slowly over time, which will accumulate in the environment. The dam is expected to be actively treated for approximately 100 years and then convert to passive maintenance system for an indefinite period. The maintenance system is designed to release pollutants. According to the data from the application to mine, it is clear that these toxins will accumulate. Specific references are embedded on this slide. Guaranteed, from a statistical perspective, the probability of pollution from this mine is 100%. Here's more information on the guaranteed pollution of copper sulfide mining, the second of the peer-reviewed studies in this presentation, this one from Earthworks in July 2012. The track record of water quality impacts resulting from pipeline spills, tailings failures, and water collection and treatment failures. This study was conducted by reviewing the state and federal documents of 14 copper mines in the United States, representing 89% of copper production in 2010, the most recent data on copper production at the time from the U.S. Geological Survey. There were three main high-level findings. First of all of the mines experienced pipeline spills or other accidental releases. 2, at 13 of the 14 mines, 92%, water collection and treatment systems failed to control contaminated mine seepage, resulting in significant water quality impacts. And 3, tailings spills occurred at 9 operations, and a partial failure of tailings impoundment occurred at 4 out of the 14 mines, 28%. In other words, even if Polymet and Twin Metals were to have the most modern, technologically advanced design, pollution would still be the most likely end result. The copper mines do not have a track record of environmental success, which will be particularly risky in Minnesota because of all of the water in the region and the low quality of the ore body. This study of U.S. copper mines and other studies from different regions of the world all document the same result. Copper ore sulfide mines are the most polluting. It just isn't worth the bet that somehow mines in Minnesota will perform better. The risks are too high with too much to lose for potentially 20 years of mining at any one site. Now we come to one of the key concerns about the Polymet mine and more on guaranteed pollution. We can have it either fast or slow, and neither is obviously acceptable. On January 25, 2019, just after the Polymet water permit was approved, there was a catastrophic dam failure in Brumadinho, Brazil, resulting in over 250 deaths and the creation of a major dead zone in the river downstream. As a result of this dam failure and others in the recent past, this type of tailings dam has been banned in several Latin American countries, including Brazil, Chile, and Peru. So developing countries are now banning this type of dam just at the time that Minnesota is planning to allow its first upstream copper tailings dam in northern Minnesota. The upstream tailings dam is the cheapest and riskiest way of handling mining waste. It is not acceptable in our state. Because of the Brumadinho failure, Brazil has mandated that existing upstream dams in Brazil be decommissioned. 19 dams are in the process of decommission, which must be completed by August 2021. There are 2 links on this slide for further information. The first link is a PowerPoint summary of a documentary that was done in Brazil showing the impacts and local reactions to the dam failure. The second link is to an interactive article in the New York Times which exploits in detail the modes of the failure and its impacts. Now I'm going to show you what this failure looked like. It's a powerful video showing how rapidly it happened. There are several of these on YouTube of varying lengths and explanations, which can be found by searching Brumadinho Dam failure. To note while watching this video, this dam in Minnesota needs to hold up forever. There's been several of these failures recently, which obviously we shouldn't allow here in Minnesota. This slide shows more information about the dam failure. The picture on the left shows visually the runoff pollution into the Atlantic Ocean from a dam failure in 2015. This gives a good idea of what the runoff would look like should the Polymet Dam fail, going down the St. Louis River and into Lake Superior. Should it happen, the water would no longer be potable. Our drinking water source would be gone. Furthermore, the pollution is permanent. How is a catastrophe like this, with tons of waste flowing, going to get cleaned up? The answer is, it never really does. Here's one of my favorite quotes from Ansel Adams. Once destroyed, nature's beauty cannot be replaced at any price. This certainly holds true for copper mining. The pollution from several mines throughout the U.S. and around the world have destroyed the potability and fish of regional waters. This will happen with Polymet, either fast through dam failure or more slowly through seepage. I think you probably agree that this isn't what we want to leave for future generations in return for 20 years of mining and a few hundred jobs. Even more concerning is that there is a direct connection between the dam failure in Brumadinho and the Polymet Dam. It is the same dam design, same dam method for evaluating its safety using the same dam engineer, Dr. Scott Olson. On this slide, the picture on the right shows a schematic of the dam design taken from the North Met Binding Environmental Impact Statement and shows the dam at the time of plant closure. It is an upstream design built on the top of an old dam tailing site for the original LVTSMC iron ore mine. This is the same dam design that's being banned in Latin America. And the Polymet Dam is particularly risky with the potential for catastrophic failure because it's built on an unstable base constructed of earthen dams that must be maintained in perpetuity 500 years or more. There are several failure modes associated with these dams. Liquefaction caused by high rain storm events, like the recent 100-year storm in Duluth washing out the streets and the zoo, etc. The severe weather events are increasing with climate change, the point being that what was once considered safe is fast changing in a number of industries with unanticipated severe weather events. This is especially concerning when the tailings dam has to be maintained as a permanent structure. Just 3 months before the Bermondino man failure, Dr. Olson was at the Bermondino site and certified this particular site's safety. He described his risk evaluation method in the video, which has obviously failed in regards to Bermondino. Dr. Olson also provided a final review of Bar Engineering's work on the Polymet's risk assessment. One final comment. Polymet's answer to these concerns is that the design is not exactly the same as the Bermondino or other failed upstream dam sites. The upstream wall isn't as steep, won't be quite as high, 250 feet versus 280 feet, there's less water flowage into the dam, etc. But there are always some differences. No dam is exactly the same. The real question is, do we really want to stake Minnesota's future on the success of this dam when it's been banned in other locations and failed so unexpectedly and miserably in other regions? Do we want the cheapest and riskiest way to manage the hazardous tailings waste in Minnesota? In conclusion, slow or fast, the result of Polymet will be polluted waters with mercury and other heavy metals. The Polymet dam design is not good enough now in those regions that have experienced the devastating results. I think it's probably clear that we shouldn't accept this risk in Minnesota either. Now we're turning to the dry stacking proposal announced by Twin Metals Antofagasta on July 18, 2019. There are 5 key things to know about this announcement. The first 4 are shown on this slide. 1. This announcement was not really news. Dry stacking was the original method of tailing storage that was proposed in Twin Metals' 10/6/2014 preliminary study. So why would Twin Metals make a show this summer of announcing this method of tailing storage? The answer is because it actually had another aim in mind. Secondly, in its press release, Twin Metals intentionally buried the lead. The lead is not about how it would handle its tailings, but is actually about where Twin Metals wants to store them. Twin Metals has admitted that it wants to move the proposed location of its mining waste to within a few miles of the boundary waters, where the waste will drain directly into the wilderness. This is bad news, and Twin Metals knows it. Now it is admitted that it will be dumping mountains of mine waste, an estimated 2.6 billion tons, into the Boundary Waters watershed. Third, please realize that no technology exists now or on the horizon, including dry stacking, that will prevent regional pollution from occurring. And fourth, dry stacking twin metal mine tailings will lead to perpetual mining pollution in the boundary waters. Just like Polymet, there will be toxic seepage, and perpetual treatment will be ineffective. Also, containment measures will be incomplete. Liners for dry stack tailings are not recommended due to an increased potential for rehydration and the leachate will escape. Also know that dry storage fails if it rehydrates. Rehydration will most certainly occur over time in Minnesota's water-rich environment. And there is no dam being proposed to hold back tailings when they do rehydrate. And once rehydrated, the pollutants will flow. Finally, the air above the boundary waters is a protected Class 1 airshed. The lakes and rivers of the boundary waters are designated at the highest level, outstanding resource value waters. Pollution from a Twin Metals mine would degrade the boundary waters' air and water, contrary to law. This is the fifth main point of this announcement. Twin Metals reference 4 other mines using dry stacking in the northern U.S. and Canada. Please note that all 4 mines are already exceeding pollution standards. Also, all 4 are still in operation, and sometimes it takes 1 to 2 decades after shutdown to see the full scale of pollution. The 4 mines. The first one is the Greens Creek mine in Alaska. Tailings are already partially rehydrated. Effluent has been documented with high total dissolved solids and heavy metal exceedances, lead and zinc. The Pogo mine in Alaska. High nitrates have been discharged. A liner was not used because it would contribute to the rehydration issues. Raglan mine, Quebec. Toxicity limits were routinely exceeded from 1998 to 2004. Rectifications in 2004 reduced but didn't eliminate these exceedances. It still pollutes. Eleanor Mine, Quebec. The effluent contains elevated concentrations of ammonia and cyanide. The reason is not clear. Major stakeholders have been notified with a rectification plan to determine the cause and how to correct these issues. In summary, a review of available environmental performance data for the 4 mines shows that Twin Metals, when it said that those mines had used dry stacking successfully, was not correct. Twin Metals either failed to review the actual track record at those mines, intended to mislead Minnesotans, or has difficulty distinguishing between success and failure. Now we're turning to the economic impacts of copper sulfide mining. I'll start with an explanation of killing the golden goose in Ely's regional economy. In a community like Ely, surveys show that people move there for a variety of reasons, including to be near the wilderness, nature, for its sense of peace and solitude, and for its sporting and outdoor activities. The Ely region has done very well economically, despite the loss of iron mining in the 60s, because of the quality of life that the area offers. This area's economy has diversified over time because the wilderness and its other natural assets attracts people with significant incomes using their talents to start small businesses, their artistry, or working in the fields of construction, medical professions, hospitality, services, or tourism. In short, the economic growth near Ely has been consistent and sustainable because of its location. But with the loss of the wilderness and/or the reputation of the boundary waters, the Ely region stands to lose much more economically than it will ever gain. Indeed, this mining will, in effect, kill the economic golden goose. It will act to drive away tourists and residents who would otherwise choose to live near a pristine wilderness. In fact, even if the copper sulfide mines are built, there are some economic realities operating that will limit the number of jobs created. The numbers of iron ore taconite mining jobs on the range have dropped significantly since the 70s, while mining output has remained constant. Automation has effectively killed the mining jobs of the past. Copper sulfide mines will provide jobs for the few, but destroy jobs for the many. In fact, according to a study of the Arizona copper industry from 1974 to 2003, the number of workers it took to produce 1,000 tons of copper plummeted by 80%. Paraphrasing from Aaron Brown, who is a journalist and blogger from Hibbing, Even if the copper sulfide mines are built, high numbers of good-paying mining jobs will never come back because of automation. Northern Minnesota is analogous to the coal mines in Appalachia. People want these jobs, but we can't go back in time. The mining jobs, the small number produced, will destroy the region and the new diversifying economies. Towns that rely on mining are boom and bust towns. History shows that there's no economic stability or long-term prosperity with this mining. Here is another study showing the negative impacts of copper sulfide mining near the boundary waters. The James H. Stock study from the Economics Department at Harvard was published in August of 2018. This study predicts the economic losses that would result if Twin Metals is built. In this study, the employment effects, income effects, and the net present value were evaluated. Basically, after evaluating a number of economic scenarios, 36 and 72 scenarios respectively, Stock found that the impact will be negative. Looking at the graphs on the left, they show that while employment and incomes would initially increase by a modest level, this increase would go back to base level after as little as 5 years. And due to the negative impacts of this mining, employment and incomes will completely reverse with significant losses within 15 to 20 years. The chart on the right shows an analysis of copper mining's projected net present value if Twin Metals gets built. The NPV is significantly negative for most of the scenarios evaluated. The corollary to this NPV is that the net present value is positive if the ore is left in the ground. Obviously, the residents in northern Minnesota want more jobs and income in their communities. What this study documents, specifically for Twin Metals, is that copper mining will give them exactly the opposite of what they are seeking. Copper sulfide mining's impact on health is one of the most critical concerns with this mining, and a full health impact study has yet to be completed for the PolyMet project. There are 2 video excerpts embedded on this slide from doctors speaking in 2016 to the Minnesota Environmental Quality Board. They are asking to prevent copper sulfide mining from creating a major water quality, mercury and lead exposure issue, especially among children in the Ironhead region, including the people of Fond du Lac and the entire city of Duluth, which is downstream from the mine. These doctors have recently expressed these same concerns to the EQB yet again this summer, highlighting their ongoing concern resulting from increased heavy metal exposure. This issue has been likened to the water issues in Flint, Michigan, only Minnesota still has an opportunity to prevent this from happening. Medical associations, including 30,000 health professionals, have actively opposed the PolyMet project. From a 2011 study by the Minnesota Department of Health, 1 in 10 babies born in the Minnesota Arrowhead already have unsafe levels of mercury in their blood. With sulfide or copper mining, methylmercury, which is a neurotoxin, would be unleashed into the surrounding waters and rivers, resulting in permanent brain damage, IQ losses, and other neurodevelopmental disorders in children. Dr. Chris Wegerson on the video clip explains that barely 5 pages were devoted out of the 3,576 pages on this project to health. An adequate baseline health assessment and impact of this mining have not been completed. A complete health impact analysis is needed now. Why would it ever not be required as a part of this type of project? We have a chance to prevent the health concerns right now that have occurred at other copper mining sites and are predicted to happen here. We must insist that a full health impact study is completed. Our government has agreements with the indigenous people, the Ojibwe, in northern Minnesota and also the Canadian government to not pollute the waters in either the Arrowhead or Canada. Both the PolyMet and Twin Mine projects breaks these treaty agreements. By the treaties of 1854 and 1855, the Ojibwe people are guaranteed the right to hunt, fish, and gather in the Arrowhead region. Copper sulfide mining, with its polluting properties, is breaking the terms of these treaties. The sulfide ore mining projects will disproportionately impact all Minnesota Ojibwe because of their reliance on clean water and the land for their health and livelihood. And the Fond du Lac Ojibwe, living downstream from Polymet, will be among the most impacted. The Ojibwe have been very vocal in their opposition to this mining and must be listened to in our commitment to honoring the treaties. Regarding Canada, the Canadian government has already expressed its opposition to Twin Meadows because of its projected pollution impacts to the waters flowing northward into Canada. As good neighbors, we need to also be mindful of our Canadian agreements. This slide highlights the key points from a presentation that was given last February 2019 to legislators by financial experts who investigated the financial assurance package approved for the Polymet project. The presenters were John Gappa, corporate CFO for 20 years, and Alan Tolmitz, corporate finance executive and senior lecturer at the Carlson School of Management. A copy of their entire presentation is embedded on this slide for a complete review of their findings. Basically, this slide shows that Polymet is financially risky to Minnesota taxpayers. It documents the inadequate financial assurances and poor economic viability of Polymet. Based on numbers provided by Polymet itself, Minnesota taxpayers could be saddled with a $1 billion cleanup bill because the financial assurance package is structured to benefit Glencore and Polymet. The Financial Assurance Trust Fund for this project is badly flawed. It potentially leaves the public liable for reclamation and long-term waste management costs. By law, mining companies are required to meet financial assurance rules to assure sufficient funds to protect Minnesota taxpayers. This has not happened. Rather, Polymet and its investors are scheduled to take profits before making any substantial payments into the trust. As shown in the graph, the fund is scheduled to be back-end funded. Payments into the trust fund will be deferred until the second half of the mine's operation, when the mine is least profitable. So where does the money go? This graph shows that the profits go first to Glencore Polymet and its investors before funding the Financial Assurance Trust. Polymet is anticipated to be in operation for 20 years. What this slide shows is how lopsided the monies are in favor of corporate profits. Basically, only $2 million per year are added to the Financial Assurance Fund during the first 9 years of the mine's operation when the mine is most profitable. Starting at year 10, the amount of money to the assurance fund, shown in green, starts to ramp up to fulfill the funding requirements of $580 million by the end of the mine's operation. Note that by the end of the operation, the mine profitability is near zero, and its income shifting instead to fund the financial assurance. In other words, if anything goes wrong, there is a huge shortfall in the financial assurance funds to protect Minnesota taxpayers. Should the mine close early, Minnesota taxpayers will be liable for the reclamation and long-term management of the tailings dam. This slide is a summary showing the gap between the dollars it will cost for reclamation and cleanup and the cash available to cover these costs. The gap is documented by the difference in what's orange, the costs, and the green, the cash available to cover the costs, for each year of the mine's projected operation. Note the source of the data for this analysis. It is Polymet's number as presented in the DNR permit to mine. The gap in funding at its peak is over $1 billion. And this money is only what's needed for the expected reclamation and maintenance costs. If there's a catastrophic spill or other environmental event, these monies are not set up to fund any unanticipated damages, expenditures, or resulting pollution. Now it's important to understand the corporate finances of Polymet and its relationship to Glencore. As often happens in mining, Polymet was established as the limited liability corporation to develop the mining site and obtain the mining permits. Polymet currently has no operations, no income, and no assets other than the mining site and the former LTV taconite plant. Therefore, in the event of failure, Polymet has little to lose. It can go into bankruptcy, and the public will be left holding the bag, hundreds of millions of dollars plus the proven environmental damage to the Lake Superior region. This mining project has been said to be a classic case of privatizing the profits and socializing the costs. Also note that since this summer, Glencore now has a majority interest in Polymet. This, however, does not change this analysis. Polymet is still the only corporation listed on the permits. Glencore's financial relationship to Polymet is typical of Glencore and other multinational corporations to avoid their corporate responsibilities and liabilities to local communities and governments. At a minimum, this corporate arrangement should serve as a warning to us of the risks that we're undertaking, financial certainly, but also environmental, health, and the long-term livability of the area. There will be more on this in subsequent slides. The point being that there are great risks to Minnesota taxpayers due to the poor corporate financial assurances. This is the final key financial consideration, which is the status of the Superfund taxpayer liability rule. Federal EPA, under the Trump administration, killed an EPA draft rule requiring taxpayer protections from Superfund liability. This rule was in the making for several years and was ready for issuance when President Trump came into office. As a consequence, now if there's issues with pollution, or worse, catastrophic failure, there's no money set aside for cleanup and reclamation. Remember that the Financial Assurance Fund is only for normal maintenance operations. Also realize that sulfide ore mining is the largest source of Superfund taxpayer liability, purportedly costing $54 billion in 2004. As of now, we are not protected from the consequences of any Superfund site pollution. This is yet another way that this mining can cost Minnesotan taxpayers. Now we turn to Minnesotans' views of copper sulfide mining. Admittedly, this is a hot and contested issue in our state. But looked at objectively, Minnesotans are overall strongly opposed to this mining, and this opposition is growing as more information becomes public. Here is a summary of the data. First of all, from the public comment processes, which document this opposition. For mining near the boundary waters, there were 3 federal public comment processes from 2016 to 2019, and these processes generated over 344,000 comments, 94% in support of protection. During the 5 public hearings, the speakers were nearly 2-to-1 in favor of the boundary waters protection. In regards to Polymet, there have also been multiple public comment periods during the permitting process with strong opposition expressed in the majority of the 108,000 comments, an extraordinarily high number of comments. Then there is the interest from the major media, not only in Minnesota, but from major national publications, including multiple articles in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Washington Post. There are huge numbers of news articles, and the pace of these articles have been accelerating, mostly in opposition to this mining and documenting the dangers to the boundary waters and the St. Louis watersheds. Finally, there have been professional polls which quantifies the strong public opposition near the boundary waters. This slide summarizes a Fabrizio Ward statewide poll conducted in February 2018 to evaluate Minnesotan views of mining near the boundary waters. It was a professionally conducted survey by a well-known conservative polling agency, the same agency, in fact, that's been used by President Trump's presidential campaign. A full copy of this survey is embedded on this slide to allow for more complete review of its results. Overall, this survey documented a clear and intense opposition to sulfide ore mining near the boundary waters, even among each of the breakout groups analyzed, including among both Democrats and Republicans, and in CD8, where the politics in this mining have been most hotly debated. The graph on this slide shows the overall results throughout Minnesota. Note that in 2018, 70% opposed this mining, which is up from 59% just a year earlier when a similar poll was conducted in February 2017. The opposition to copper ore sulfur mining is strong and gaining in overall numbers and intensity. I think it's safe to say that our politicians in the Northland are not always reflecting this public sentiment. More citizen participation, public hearings, and understanding by our politicians are needed in order to overcome the politics of this issue and to recognize the hazards and real costs. Former Governor Arne Carlson has repeatedly talked about the lack of governmental hearings for both Twin Metals and Polymet. His comment about Polymet from April 2019 stated it most succinctly. Quote, "During this legislative session, well over 2,800 bills have been introduced and hundreds of hours have been devoted to hearings, debates, and negotiations. Sadly, not 10 minutes have been devoted to Polymet and the impact this copper mining operation will have on the health of the people and wildlife that depend on safe water from Lake Superior, the BWCA, and all of the affected tributaries." End quote. As a citizenry, we must insist that these issues and all viewpoints are given full hearings and consideration by our current governor, governmental agencies, and our elected officials. The next slides describe the unscrupulousness of the multinational mining companies. In short, they are under investigation for corrupt, ruthless practices and are not the type of companies that will serve Minnesota well. In the interest of time, we will be shortening our comments in this area, but the typical practices of these corporations, as well as damages they create to regions where they operate, cannot be overstated. You'll notice too that these slides focus mainly on Glencore, but be assured that there is a shadow report and numerous articles scandals surrounding Antofagasta too. This slide and the next one show a few of the articles about Glencore. Glencore is known for its greed and corruption and is currently under investigation in the U.S. for its unethical business finance practices. A quote from one of these articles highlights the issues. What distinguishes Glencore is its particularly aggressive business style. Aggressive from all points of view. Tax avoidance, corruption, total neglect for employees, as well as the communities they work in, and its non-responsiveness to critique. One of the first things to note is the current chairman of Glencore, Tony Hayward. This is the same Tony Hayward who was forced out as CEO of BP for his heartless comments about the environment and his cold-hearted insensitivities to the people of the U.S. during the Deep Horizon oil spill in the Caribbean. As leader of Glencore, he typifies what Glencore is and how it acts. The other articles on these slides are examples of the typical ethical lapses and how politics and the influence of big money get intermingled with the mining issues. We recommend that you Google and read these articles. This slide shows a summary statement from April 2017, the Glencore Shadow Report on Operations in Latin America. Excerpts from this summary highlight how Glencore operates. Quote, Glencore has contracts with other companies to blur its direct participation in the mining business, even though from its central offices in Zug, it has complete direction and knowledge of the spectrum of its holdings. This maneuver formally and legally hides the direct control and corporate responsibility of the Glencore head office in each country. This indirect control gives the company a huge advantage in terms of earnings and financial results, as they don't create business groups by country. The company has property, assets, and responsibilities that are independent and limited to each holding and subsidiary. Glencore hides its corporate unit from governments. This highly fragmented, complex, and dispersed corporate design generates serious obstacles to establish real responsibility, corporate governance, and transparency." End quote. Please read this statement on the slide in its entirety. This statement describes exactly how Glencore has operated with Polymet as its shell corporation to obtain the needed permits while remaining a step removed to avoid its responsibility for revealing its future true incomes, tax liabilities, and the permitted commitments it's made to Minnesota and any environmental damages that get incurred. Also note that Twin Mines and Antofagasta follow a similar corporate relationship. In summary, these multinational corporations exist to extract the ore, make their profits, and then get out once the ore is taken. There is no real commitment to the communities where they operate. While local communities get wooed, and these corporations will do what's needed to gain their trust during the mine's planning and startup, Minnesota and localities will be on their own to protect their own interests once mining operations are up and running. This slide shows a case example demonstrating how mining companies effectively work in their own interests to the detriment of the communities where they mine. It summarizes from a former miner, Dwayne Barons, his personal experiences as a mining employee at a sulfur ore mine. Dwayne now lives in northern Minnesota and has been an ardent voice of opposition to this mining as a result of his experience. In Dwayne's letter to the editor, he documents how one company, Gas Hills in Wyoming, from the 1970s and 80s, was able to skirt its regulatory commitments. He demonstrates how, when this mining site became less profitable, the mining company changed dramatically in the treatment of its employees and regulatory compliance. The Wyoming state regulations were then relaxed because, after all, the water was already degraded, and the company was not held to account for any of its environmental damages. Ultimately, the community was saddled with the environmental impacts, including the degraded water, which is no longer potable even to this day, and it is a less safe, desirable region to live in. This experience is a first-hand account of what's happened at other mining sites and in other regions, and is predicted to happen in Minnesota should this mining occur. Dwayne's excellent LTE is included as an embedded document on this slide. We need to take heed of the history of how sulfide ore mines have operated and the dangers that they pose if they get built in Minnesota. This presentation is meant to be a factual, scientific summary outlining our reasons why copper sulfide mining must never be allowed in Minnesota. However, as with every issue, politics and emotions can become important components, which sometimes overtakes the facts and leads to poor decision-making. That being said, public trust in our state government has been shaken by recent questions raised in regards to the fairness and transparency of the permitting and regulatory processes. Because of all of the recent developments, editorials, and a barrage of news articles on these issues, Minnesota officials should be forceful and outspoken about taking actions to restore our public trust. The editorials listed on this slide show a sampling of the issues that have shaken our confidence. 1. It's up to Governor Walz to end secrecy over the Twin Metals mine. From the Star Tribune editorial board, 23, 2019. 2. Revisit Polymet permits in light of the MPCA scandal. From John Marty, City Pages, July 12, 2019. 3. Get clear answers in public hearing before moving ahead with Polymet mine. St. Cloud Times editorial board, 9/27, 2019. So in the 8/23 Star Tribune editorial, Governor Walz provided a quote which stated well what his response should be to these issues. Quote, "As governor, I have responsibility to ensure that mining projects in Minnesota don't move forward unless there is a rigorous environmental review and permitting process. The manner in which we do our work can either bolster or undermine the trust Minnesotans have in governmental decision-making." End quote. Now we urge Governor Walz and all state officials to put in place the specific actions needed to restore public trust, including stoppage of any agency work to move these projects forward, as well as a complete investigation to find out what's happened. There can be no question among Minnesotans that our government is working in an open and transparent manner, listening to all viewpoints to obtain the best result in the public interests of our state. These are our requests of the governor's office and other state officials. 1. Strengthen the copper sulfide mining law in Minnesota, Chapter 6132. Change the law to allow Minnesota state determination on permitting based on the totality of the facts and science. Allow agencies to decide mining approvals based on the overall interest of the people of the state. Specifically require comprehensive health, economic, and environmental impact studies. Prohibit sham permitting practices and allowance of perpetual tailings maintenance. Additionally, devise other specific rules and standards yet to be defined. 2. Recognize that the federal process is currently broken. It has been corrupted. At the state level, as a part of analyzing any mining project application, the state should be required to answer a question as well as is currently required at the federal level: is the mining site in itself an appropriate site for a copper mine? This analysis should be covered within our newly revised state law, Chapter 6132. 3. Ensure that any failures of the polymet permitting process get codified where possible within the new mining law. Specifically for polymet now, publicly call on the DNR to require Glencore's name in all polymet permits and agreements. Force a revision of the financial assurance package to protect Minnesota taxpayers. Require the completion of a full health, economic, and supplemental EIS. Reevaluate the Polymet Dam permit in light of the Bernardino Dam failure. And finally, 4. Work to restore the reputation and public trust in Minnesota government. Although currently being handled in the courts, Governor Walz should publicly call for a suspension of the Polymet and Twin Metals projects until a complete investigation of the approval processes are completed. Furthermore, Governor Walz should call for public hearings so that experts and the public can become fully engaged, heard, and documented as a part of the process. Jackie and I express our gratitude to the many who have worked tirelessly to bring the truth of this mining to light. We list some of the main contributors to our presentation on this slide, but there are so many other organizations, reporters, specific politicians who have taken a lead, and long-standing volunteers who are not shown here. This summer, there has also been new information which has heightened the awareness of this mining and taken the debate in some new directions. We have updated our presentation slightly to include some of this information. And there are other aspects of this issue, such as the legal challenges, that we don't begin to address. In the end, our belief is that the actions of the nonprofit organizations, dedicated individuals, including our public interest attorneys, specific political leaders on this issue, as well as Minnesota's sensibilities to always do what's fundamentally in our state's long-term interest, will win out in this debate. In many ways, this is a battle of big-moneyed interest who can buy influence and shape perceptions, while support of the public interest can be more difficult to finance and sustain. Again, the nonprofit organizations are doing an amazing job to protect Minnesota. We owe these organizations our gratitude. And so we ask you, please help us take action before it's too late. We thank you for listening to our presentation today. This slide was left blank to encourage discussion and also to develop some action steps that you can follow to help to stop this mining. And finally, we have several backup slides which we encourage you to review. And thank you again for listening to this presentation.